Hello and welcome to the Commission Files. I'm Will Leach.
Hello, Kerry Gregg here. We're back in Studio 1 at Commission Christian Radio just outside Belfast.
And this time we're taking a good long look at our surroundings. We're sitting in a very rare thing, one of only a handful of specialised, purpose-built radio drama studios on the island of Ireland.
There's one at BBC Northern Ireland in Belfast, one at RTE in Dublin, and this one here in Dundonald. And, well, we don't know of any others quite like it until you cross the Irish Sea to Great Britain.
Now, Commission doesn't just make radio drama. You know this only too well because you're listening to something else we make, the Commission Files, one of our podcasts. And that's not all.
So it's time to let you hear more about what Commission is, how we started, what we do now, and how you could join us to be part of it all or support us.
Now, we want to introduce you to three special guests. Colm Flanagan is Commission's Head of Programmes. He trained as a BBC audio supervisor a mere 50 years ago and is an experienced radio drama producer. Hilary Jewhurst is the talent, an actor and presenter, also one of our occasional writers. And Drew Gibson is also a drama voice, an actor. He's produced our new children's series called Treasure Box, and also he's a retired Presbyterian minister. Welcome, all of you, to a studio you know very well, but welcome for the first time to the Commission Files.
Lovely being here. Very much.
It's great to have you all here. And welcome to Chris Clotworthy, our studio engineer through the glass in the control room. Hi, Chris.
Was that a wave?
It
I
was.
think that was a wave.
Colm, how and why did Commission begin back in 1975?
The Commission was the vision of a guy called Noel Spears. And Noel had been involved with another group who were making Christian radio, though not drama, and he'd been involved with that for 4 or 5 years. So that group disbanded in 1972 because they were in a studio which was in a very dangerous area. And Noel and a number of other people decided that they would like to start a new work. The original group went into filming, but Noel and some others felt that they wanted to stay with radio. And they had been experimenting a bit with programmes other than the more regular, what were called hymn sandwiches on radio, which basically was a little compressed church service. Noel believed that there was a better way of getting people to listen in the first place. And the idea behind it all was a story. Stories are always acceptable. They launched it at the Bangor Missionary Convention here. They had 10 minutes to tell people about it. That was the official beginning in August. I appeared in October. So I was nearly in at the beginning.
And you haven't been away since?
No, I'm still here just getting less and less hair as the years go by and all those other things that happened to us. But yes, I'm still here for a while anyway.
So what inspired you to actually get involved, Colm?
Well, it was my dentist.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that.
One day I was having an examination by my dentist, and he said, "You're working in the BBC, aren't you, Colm?" I had just started, so I said, yes. And he said, there's a fellow called Noel Spears. I think you should get in touch with him. He's trying to make a Christian radio station or something. I rang this chap Noel Spears. That was a Thursday. On the Saturday I went down to meet him, and he took me to the studio, and that was me hooked.
We'll get into the various studios we've had because there's a lot of adventures there, but I want to get to the idea of what hooked each of you. Hilary, what's your joining story? What hooked you on Commission and what radio could do?
Well, I had heard about Commission Christian Radio many years ago, and just fleetingly, but even in that moment was intrigued that there was such a thing in Northern Ireland as a radio station, which was specifically Christian. But that was it at that time. And then maybe 10 years ago, met a friend who said, oh yes, she was telling me she volunteered with Commission. So that started a conversation. I was interested, and she invited me along to an information evening here where Colm and others explained everything that Commission did, and the offer was thrown out, and if you'd like to have a go at anything, just say. So I took courage and said, yep, I would love to have a go recording. And I think it actually was Chris in this studio gave me a sheet of paper and said, read that, and I'll record it. And as soon as I sat down here, I thought, I love this.
Gets you, doesn't it?
It does. And, well, here I am.
As they say, it's one of those situations that once you get hooked, you can't leave it.
Definitely, definitely.
Drew.
I have no idea. I don't remember. It must have been about 1993 or thereabouts. And I remember David Bruce was involved in some way or other. But I have a feeling it may have been because I'd done a few things for Downtown at the BBC, Thought for the Day, that type of thing. And I've always enjoyed telling stories. And so, however I came along, once I knew there was storytelling, I was in.
Colm, we often say in this podcast we're in Dundonald, but Commission hasn't always been in Dundonald. It's been in some very interesting buildings. At the start, right in the centre of Belfast.
Yes, the place I visited in October 1975 was a wreck. It was a terraced house. It had belonged to a church who had offered it to Commission for a very small rent, and when we were in it you could see why. It needed a lot of work. It also needed work to make it into a radio studio.
And to get the pigeons out.
And the pigeons in the loft, yeah. I wasn't involved with that, thankfully. Somebody else got that job to do. But the idea was, there were three stories to this place. It was 348 Ravenhill Road, now occupied by proper people. We were there for 5 years, and we converted that little place, made a studio on the first floor and a little control room, much, much smaller. But more than sufficient as far as we were concerned. We had nothing. There was no money. Everything was given and donated, including the first tape recorder, which we still have in a cupboard somewhere here. It took us nearly 2 years before anything that we made was actually broadcast, because it was a huge learning curve for everybody. How to make a studio, how do you build a studio, how do you, with on very small budgets, put decent equipment in? Because we knew right from the start that we had to get it good technically, because without that, no point. Drama is quite demanding in that regard. But anyhow, all of that happened then after 5 years in it. The planning authorities got to know what we were doing and threw us out on the grounds that we weren't residential. We looked around and we had one idea and it didn't work. And then one day Noel rang me and said, I think I've got the place for us. And I said, oh yeah. And he said, yes, it's an air raid shelter. Now, I'd seen those on the beach at Ballywalter, where I live, and dugouts or something. And I had visions of something that you went down a stair, or what were they like the things in people's gardens
the
during the war.
Shelters.
That's right, yes. But I said, oh, all right. Okay, Noel. I'm thinking he's nuts. But we went to the Miller Street, not very far from where we actually were in Ravenhill Road, and I looked at this thing and just gulped. It was a big building. It had 2 rooms. It had 18-inch thick walls and a foot thick concrete, because it was a community shelter for the people in the area to go to when there was an air raid on. So we moved in there in 1982. And
brilliantly soundproof, I'm assuming.
Very much so. It did actually knock and rumble a bit if there was a bus or something going past, or a heavy lorry.
No good during an Old Testament prophet speech, but otherwise.
But actually it was very rare, because Miller Street was quite a quiet street. We could occasionally hear planes, but mostly not. We usually prayed for the wind to change on the night we were there. And it was damp. Never got rid of the damp. And there was a kind of musty
I
smell.
do remember it being very cold.
Yes.
I remember being very excited myself as a student, going down
we were both
to
students
yes,
in the 80s
down
when
to
we arrived, and that was the first place we saw, and just beyond excited that you could do this and didn't have to work for one of the broadcasting companies.
Yeah, I mean, despite the rather gloomy picture I've got about it, it was great size. It was quite a big place. The studio was big anyway. The green room, as we call it, was a bit small, and the toilet was pretty awful.
Yes.
We built on a kind of add-on to it when we took it over. There was a lot of building work involved, but we were able to move in there in 1982 and started recording. And we were there for 22 years, till 2004, and branched out. We continued to do the radio drama, which has always been the core. We were doing slots for local stations, quite a lot of work with local stations and also with hospital radio, things like that. So Commission burgeoned in those years. It grew bigger, but it never actually was big enough to have paid staff or anything like this. It all stayed voluntary.
And never a radio station, always a place that made programmes
Yes.
and gave them to other radio stations
Yes,
to play for nothing.
You know, we say a radio station, but actually we've never been involved in ourselves broadcasting with a mast up or a dish or something like that. We've always made the programmes for other radio stations to put out, be they secular or Christian. For what we did, it was fine, but it was a rather dingy building. We think there may have been going to be trouble with a concrete roof after all those years, and that would have been extremely expensive even to fix, let alone improve. Our landlords wanted us out because they wanted to develop the area. Again, another year and a half to get here. But we did decide that we would go for broke and try and put facilities which we could be proud of and say no matter who came in here, they would be able to say, you know, there's nowhere to point the damp, or there's no smell. You know,
We can vouch for that,
all of
can't
that.
we?
So this place cost a lot of money to do, and that could be a very long story if I started to get involved in it. But we actually were able to come here, and within a few years we were free of any debts.
Hilary, Drew, when you, both of you, first came in and saw what we'd done here, what struck you?
Oh, I was amazed. I mean, I did not expect, and I don't know anything about studios, etc., but even to my eye it looked state of the art, I felt.
Yeah, I'd been in the BBC once or twice and thought, yeah, this is the same sort of thing. It just looked professional.
Now, you can listen to lots of our series by searching for Commission Radio Drama wherever you find this particular podcast. If you want an idea of how they work, we're going to give you an example. Let's travel back in time to that first century New Testament world we so often write about, and a man who's often overlooked, Barnabas, the encourager. Colm, this was a commission drama. Where did it come from?
A preacher at our church one night who said, you know, Barnabas was an encouragement to people around him. And I thought, that's a nice idea. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write something on it. It'd be an interesting character to do, because we know that he had a life, but we only know little bits of it. So there's a lot that needs filling in a sense, with a character like that. And his importance was quite considerable, and yet he's really a minor figure. So that was the thinking, very ordinary guy, but he meets some relatives of Jesus' mother Mary and becomes a Christian, or a follower of the way, as we call it in the drama. And the whole idea of drama being to have people with who your people listening will connect with.
We're going to hear a clip now from the beginning when our narrator introduces himself and his story.
This is the story of a remarkable man. His influence on all our lives, including mine, has been very significant. Yet oddly, he's not as well known as he should be. I was privileged to know him from quite early on, and I believe the time has come to set out the record of what he did. He was a modest man. He would never push himself forward, and yet I don't want him to go unrecorded, or unrewarded for that matter, though he'd be the first to protest that his reward will come from the Lord, and that's all he asks. Maybe so, but still I want this to be a tribute to him. His name? I expect you're wondering when I get to all this. Well, it's Barnabas. Jonas Barnabas, to be exact, though few ever use the first name. And who am I? I'm called Elias. My family and Barnabas's were neighbours on the island of Cyprus in the eastern Mediterranean Sea. We'd lived beside each other for years, but one day something happened that changed all our lives.
Barnabas, good to see you.
Well, as always, Elias, you pick a good time. I was just about to have a glass of wine. Will you join me? Come and sit down.
Oh, very well, if you insist.
No, if you'd rather not.
Oh, give it here. So, what's new, Barnabas?
I'm going out to the vineyard later. I want to see how the grapes are faring. It's been a bit cool recently and I want to check the vines. You need to keep an eye on them.
Don't you trust your men up there, then?
Oh, yes, but there's nothing like the personal touch.
Sometimes I think you're a bit soft on them, Barnabas.
Really?
Yes, people take advantage. You're too trusting.
I'm not soft, as you say, just fair and reasonable.
Oh, have it your way, then.
And my business is prospering. That's the proof that my way works.
OK. I give in. I can see I'll never make a mean, grasping employer out of you.
Thank God for that. Oh, were you doing anything special this evening?
No.
Because I've some people coming I'd like you to meet. I've a cousin. His name's John Mark, and he's with another, a woman called Mary. They're coming here to spend some time with us. I'd like you to meet them both. And bring Ruth as well, if she's free.
Oh, for one of your dinners? Oh, she'll be free.
Great. Well, I better be getting up to the vines now. Coming?
Now, you wrote that script, but when you get one from any writer, what are you looking for early on in episode 1?
I'm looking for characters who will attract the listener in. So you've got to try and think of what kind of character are they? You know, are they brusque with people? Or are they going to be a difficult person or a person you won't like much? More often I would do it with someone that I quite liked, someone like me. And in ways there's sort of lots of me in some of the characters very often, because that's what you do. At least that's what I do, and it so far has worked reasonably well. But
did you know, Colm, that as a preacher, you can go through the same sort of thing when you preach from a narrative text? You can often preach in the way that you would have said what Jesus said or said what David said. Yourself comes into it. That can be dangerous enough.
But it also, I think it can be inspiring. I'm sure when you think about any storytellers, they bring the Bible to life, and that's ultimately what commission is about. That's what we're trying to do.
It is, and really that's the crux of it, because the Bible for many of us is a book. Yes, it's a story, but the characters are somewhat two-dimensional. They're either saints or they're enemies of God. There's not much in between that you get. And yet, most of us in our life experience finds that that's how life is. And that's what, even with our own faith, you know, there are times where we're not the golden idea that we want. So when we have Paul in the Bible, it's so easy to make this perfect character. And yet, he was flawed too. And that was one of the things in that particular series in Barnabas, which ends with, the whole thing ends with a row.
Well, we're going to go to another clip from that series, and it is a fascinating moment to contemplate, because I've often wondered how Paul, whom they would have known as Saul of Tarsus, was received by persecuted Christians after his conversion. So here it is, imagined.
I'm sorry to disturb you, but I'm looking for the house of the man known as Barnabas. He comes from Cyprus.
And who are you? It's late, you know.
Yes, I know. My name is Saul, from Tarsus.
You? Have you come to arrest us?
No, I haven't.
Do you expect me to believe you? I know what you have done to our people. I was there when they stoned Stephen.
Well, look, I want to explain.
Explain? How can you explain anything like that? I think you should go now.
What's going on? John Mark, who is this?
It's Saul Barnabas. He just arrived here, and I'm sending him away.
Sir, I want to talk to you. It's very important. Look, I know what you must think of me. Your friend here has every right to be angry, but I have seen the Lord. He came to me on the road to Damascus. I must speak with his disciples, the leaders of the way.
Really? Well, I am not a leader, but I think you may as well come in. We won't get anywhere by standing on the street.
But Barnabas...
I doubt if Saul is planning to arrest us. He'd hardly come here on his own if he was. Come in, Saul. We'll hear what you have to say.
That was some scene, so it was... I'm sure that was challenging to make, was it?
I loved writing it. I imagined myself there. I imagined myself in the part of John Mark. And, you know, if that happened, I would have reacted like that, thinking this person was one who had persecuted, possibly killed my friends.
Does it work for you too?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
it does. Certainly, there's enough information in the New Testament to say that, there were significant problems in the church when
It's
Paul
very,
arrived.
very real.
Yeah,
That
very much
is,
so.
I could imagine
Yeah.
that is exactly the way they reacted.
Mm-hmm. Which makes Barnabas stand out all the more as
Yeah.
one who was accepting of Paul.
And brings the human side to everything, doesn't it? The fact that what we're actually doing in commission brings it home to people, that it's about real life stories.
Yeah.
Colm, we're in Studio One, and I suspect people have very little idea, why would they, how it works from script to actor to producer to engineer in this room, which is a very complicated room in some ways, whilst being a very simple room at the same time. How does it work? Because you're usually producing on a drama session.
Well, the first thing you have to do is get the script, and that's quite a long process for whichever way you're doing it, whether it's writing it oneself as producer or getting a writer in to do it. Once that's ready, then there are all the mundane things even before you get to the studio, like getting copies for the cast, scheduling the cast. That's a very time-consuming business. But when you get here, it's designed to allow you to think that you're recording somewhere you're not. For example, outside in a field, you're still in a room in here. So we have to do, how do you do that? How do you change it? And the answer is you have a special acoustic treatment of the room so that you could be in 3 or 4 different rooms, or indeed none at all.
Or as we always think we're being teleported like Doctor Who, don't we?
And we do have a TARDIS.
We do.
Let's hear a very quick illustration of what Colm's talking about, because we have effectively 3 studio areas here in Studio One. They sound different, and I took a walk around Studio One here a little earlier. This is Area 1, the normal studio area where we're having this conversation. But let's move to Area 2. Already you can hear that it sounds quite different. We're inside a room. We create that by having brick walls, a concrete floor, a plaster ceiling, and we can create the sound of someone coming to the door and me opening it. We can even create the sound of someone sneaking about in the undergrowth outside. You're going to love Area 3, and we're going to walk there right now, and as I do so, you can hear my voice change. That's because we're in what we call a dead area. Everything's absorbent, carpet on the floor, curtains all the way around, acoustic treatment on the ceiling. This is how we make the sound of being outside where there's nothing for your voice to bounce off. Now we might add in some sounds to make it more realistic, perhaps a busy village, perhaps some birdsong. Anything that makes you really believe that I am where the story is happening. Colm, how important are those 3 areas? Can you essentially make it sound like people are anywhere, anytime?
Yes, pretty well. It's one of the beauties of radio, that you can, using that properly, is a way of having, you don't have to have sets and all things like that. Doesn't matter really what it looks like.
Drew, you've stood here as an actor, taken direction through the loudspeaker from Colm, moved about whilst holding a script in your hand. What's it like?
Well, I don't mind being told what to do. I'm happy doing that, and I'll try to produce what the producer or director wants me to do. But I also love inhabiting a character and genuinely trying to sound angry or afraid or whatever it might be. And I have to link that, I'm sorry I keep doing this, but I have to link that into preaching, because preaching is a bit of a performance.
Do you have an Old Testament voice and a New Testament voice?
Absolutely.
Bet you do.
But I mean, so many parts of Scripture where you have somebody speaking or you have a dramatic interaction, they can be read different ways. And so you play with that for a while to see what actually makes most sense in the context. And commission allows me to do that. So I enjoy it.
Hilary, you have experience of making a series about people and their stories, and it's called Stolen Lives for Transworld Radio. Now, there's 13 parts. How do you actually approach it, and what's it like?
Well, it was a fascinating experience doing that, really. It began with Yvonne Knox, who arrived at the studio with her ideas and her vision to make a programme about women and about women's issues that weren't normally addressed. Things like domestic violence, alcoholism, imprisonment. Really hard, tough things. And she had already asked women, would they be willing to be interviewed about their experiences? And they were wonderful. They were sort of just some of them very raw interviews of their experiences. And so that gradually became made into this programme, Stolen Lives. And Yvonne went out with her little tape recorder and did these interviews, and then she did her message from teaching from the Bible about those things.
And you presented those together, and we'll hear a clip of that in a moment, but that presumably was entirely new for you.
Oh, totally, yes.
How come you're so good at it then?
No, because there's our director, you see, who tends to nudge quite hard and push you into things that you've never ever done before and you don't think you could do, but you end up doing them.
Mm-hmm. I can totally...
Do you know that feeling?
Yes, I know that feeling.
It's happened to me over and over again, and to date I have ended up really enjoying the experience of doing something new.
I do remember my very first interview, Colm giving me a tape recorder and going to Father Forsyth to speak to him about contraception.
I think he was winding you up.
He didn't tell me that. I took it seriously. It was the blind leading the blind, shall we say?
Let's hear a brief clip from Stolen Lives. You and Yvonne Knox. Hilary, some of the issues you were talking about and what inspires her.
In there's a tree stump, okay, and that's now grown, that's all grown up. Mm-hmm. I sat on this stump here, and so moved was I by what God had just shown me that I took off my sandals, because for me this was like my burning bush experience, you know, and I sat there and I prayed, and just at that moment I felt God say to me, turn round. And I turned round away from the path, and I looked round, and what did I see but my old mountain sleeve crib, and on top of it another very familiar sight, but this day I saw the 4 masts on top of sleeve crib. And that moment for me connected me straight to Project Hannah as a ministry of Transworld Radio. And you know what? I was later to find out that those masts are for the emergency services in Northern Ireland. So they have such significance in terms of rescue. So here I was, in between death and hope.
Hilary, I can see you nodding as you remember that day and that recording and that story. Now, you're getting a real story from someone whilst also going through the artifice of having to do a recording that works, and if something doesn't work, do it again. So it must be difficult to get the mood and get it right.
Well, I suppose we just started at the car park and started walking into this forest that I knew meant so much to Yvonne, and where there was a very particular spot. So in a way, I didn't find that too difficult, because I knew just how amazing this was going to be when she told her story of arriving at this very spot.
But it sounds to us like we're there with you, and that's because it's recorded right and edited right, and you can hear the atmosphere, you can hear the outside. If we'd been recreating that Colm, we'd have done it in Area 3. with
Yes,
appropriate sound
indeed.
effects. But
Yes.
it was done really out and about
Yeah.
and properly. And it's interesting that contrast in the kind of programmes we make.
Drew, I'm going to go to you because you've been involved with children's dramas and Treasure Box. Would you like to fill us in a wee bit more about that?
Yes, Treasure Box actually had its beginning in a series of recordings that Hilary made. Patricia St. John's book Treasures of the Snow. Hilary edited into 20, wasn't it? 20 episodes?
Yeah.
Yep. And then I think it was Colm had the idea of bringing these 7 to 8 minute episodes up to 15-minute programmes. So we talked about that, and I reached back, I suppose, into my days at CSSM and beach missions, youth clubs and so on, and thought, well, we could do a little mini CSSM here. So if we have a song, if we have a memory verse being taught, we can then tell the story that's already recorded that Hilary has done. I'll bring a thought or two at the end to bind things together, and bingo, we've got 15 minutes. So that's how it came about, and we've put that together over the past couple of years. It took quite a while to do that.
That's the thing about radio. Everybody thinks when they hear the finished the finished product that, oh, that's just appeared and it's all really easy. But actually, over the years, you realise it's a long time from start to finish.
But it worked well because using Treasures of the Snow, I remember, Drew, you had the idea, let's look at each chapter and get a theme. And that then led us to, guided us for the memory verse, for the song, and for what Drew then said. So it actually then followed on once we had our structure.
Yeah, that's right.
That
It's important that the theme is a biblical theme and not just a Treasures of the Snow theme. So that's why it required that bit of work to do that.
Well, look, let's hear an example of the teaching.
Sure.
Helmets, bandages, spacesuits and shoes. In different ways, they all protect us. The Bible tells us of another very special kind of protection, doesn't it, Olivia?
Yes, it does. And we find it in a very short verse in a letter written to the people who lived in Corinth. It's this: love always protects. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7. Say it with me. Love always protects.
And here's an example of storytelling.
One day the new flower looked around and spoke. "Look at me," it said. "I am the most beautiful plant in this garden. I am the brightest, the most colourful, and the sweetest smelling of all." The new plant pushed its roots into its boots and stretched higher and higher up the front of the big house. Gazing proudly across the garden, it spread its perfume through the air so that all the other plants and trees would notice how wonderful it was. "Do you see my great flowers of deep red and bright yellow? Oh, smell my beautiful perfume. Look at my spreading branches. Oh, how wonderful I am. I am glorious."
That little bit of story that you heard Hilary telling there wasn't actually from Treasures of the Snow. It was from a series of stories written by a friend of mine, Eddie Spence. We were 6 episodes short of the 26 that Transworld Radio needed. So
you had a wee panic.
Yeah,
you came up with something. That's what every producer does.
Well, exactly. This was the first attempt I'd had at producing, so I thought, oh, well, I better take the bull by the horns. Got Eddie's stories, reworked them for radio, recorded them, and I think they've worked well.
There's an interesting thing in all of this because you're raising Bible texts, Bible issues, Bible stories, Christian concepts. Your own faith must play an important part in everything Commission does, all 3 of you.
It does. It just has to. And so I've found that there have been moments of encouragement. I've read something, maybe even as I'm saying something, and thinking, I right enough. Or the odd time there's been a little challenge. I wouldn't have seen it like that. I wouldn't have done it like that. But hey, fair enough.
Cool.
I think one of the things that can happen as you write these pieces of the drama or even get involved in them, because I, at one time, was not the only producer here. There were two others who have done quite a lot of work, but they both retired some time ago. What it did was it made me read my Bible differently. When I was in church, I kind of tended to be looking for a story rather than 5 theological points, or indeed more.
True, you were trained just to have 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all starting with the same letter. But that's what Colm's saying there is very important, because we tend to reduce Scripture to a number of solid, steady, predictable points. But much of it is narrative. There's emotion in there, there's feeling, and that has to be brought out to make it, to allow it to speak clearly.
Mm-hmm.
That's clearly resonating with you, Hilary.
Well, it is. I suppose I'm thinking of when I've been asked to read the Bible in church. I think I read it now differently, because I think I read it nearly as if I am the person, to make it live, because it is a story, the most wonderful story. And so now when I listen to some readings of the Bible, maybe if it's, I feel like saying, oh, give it a bit of welly.
What we could do with you with 20 minutes teaching in the studio, absolutely. And then there's this, because everyone's right now listening to a podcast, and it isn't a drama, and it isn't a children's series, it's the Commission Files. This is episode 17, so maybe not such a new venture for us. But I'm going to give everybody a very quick reminder of some of our recent highlights.
And it was only about 6 weeks ago that somebody came up to me in church and said, do you know that Sunday that the people came from Hydebank to speak really changed my views about the people in Hydebank? That was their perception that, gosh, for years I've thought about, those so-and-sos who live here in Hydebank. And it was the first time that I really had my perceptions challenged and changed. And that was nearly 18 months after the event. And I thought, well, isn't that really interesting? That's just one person's example of what the prison service part of what the prison service aim to do to change hearts and minds and to challenge perceptions. Because the reality is that every one of us, probably every time we get into our car, breaks the law.
Is it time for us to get real about what it's like to be displaced from everything and everyone you know?
If you had have asked me that question a year, 2 years ago, I would have said, I'm so frustrated, nobody gets this. And I would be the first person to call the church out on things, and I have done, and I do. I'm not one for keeping my opinions to myself. However, I have to say I'm really proud of our churches. I have been so encouraged by how people have stepped up. I've been so encouraged how people have stepped out of their comfort zones in order to welcome those that are here.
But you can start with your local councillor, whoever that is, and not just the councillor of the party you may have voted for.
That's important.
So for me, that's a starting point. Let's pastor our communities so that those who have responsibility in our communities know that they're loved and cared for and pastored.
Nicola?
I think it's to live up to your responsibility. As a Christian, you have a responsibility to your community, to your society. So for me, I don't understand how you can be a Christian and not care about politics. To me, it's completely the wrong way around. To me, it's one is inevitably leads to the other.
Well, the voices you heard there in various episodes of the Commission Files were Ruth Walker, Avril Edgar, Norman Hamilton and Nicola Mellon, the former Stormont minister.
This podcast, I've just been thinking, it's the newest venture in Commission. Colm, you want Commission to bear fruit in new ways. And that has to go back to from nearly 50 years ago. Does it amaze you to see how God has worked throughout Commission and just brought you into so many different areas?
There's no doubt of that. I mean, right from the very first days, the whole thing was a project that you think, you can't do this. I mean, these 3 or 4 people, mostly in their early 20s, building a studio, who's going to use stuff from that? And, I mean, Commission has always been very much a faith thing, because one of the things we don't get most of the time that I've been here is feedback, because our stuff, those dramas, the bit clips you listen to, went to a number of stations around the world, and we never hear back from them, except the fact that they keep asking for more. And we have to be happy with that. When we were working locally, you would get a bit of feedback because somebody would have heard Downtown Radio or whatever it was that the slot was on. Our object is to produce radio, largely but not exclusively drama. And I've always thought that was the right approach, because we have had stuff for hospital radios, we have done things for local radio here in Northern Ireland, and the dramas sometimes are part of it, but not necessarily. And the podcast comes into that. One of my friends recently told me podcasts are the new radio.
And that's the interesting thing, because now we do get them to people ourselves, although we've never had masts and we've never had transmitters. We publish our podcasts, and this is a whole new area for us. Over the years, lots and lots of people have stood in this studio. They've stood with scripts, they've listened to you talk through the speaker from the control room next door where Chris is at the minute. And it isn't always easy to make good, convincing, realistic drama and tell those stories. There's acting, of course, and it can go wrong, and sometimes hilariously so. And our actors, when they mess up, frankly, like everywhere else, they really mess up, and Colm, or whoever is producing, has to be very patient as they try to control everything. And sometimes I think they're just messing about. Do you have outtakes, I hear you ask? Yes, we do. Listen to this.
Right, let's hear it from the top.
We are... No.
Stand by.
That's her out of the way.
Joanna does become a nuisance sometimes.
Well, is there a quiet inn in this room?
I do have one here. I've had it for years. It's too old-fashioned nowadays. Not with... made a muck of that, didn't I? Lost me line.
We were very glad here. It shows...
What? What is it? Right.
Whoever hungers, let him come and eat. Whoever is in need, let him come and keep the Passover with us. We've forgotten to say our lines, haven't we? Well, never mind.
Very good, yes. They were all asleep, Marvin. You put them all to sleep.
I'm sorry. I was getting so carried away I forgot to turn the page. I'm sorry.
Right, but enough of that.
You can't hold your beer, Jacob, that's the problem. Ale you kept filling me cup with. Hey, you got me drunk deliberately so that I wouldn't realise that I was getting Jacob, calm down, son. I'm your uncle. Don't
Yes, thank you.
Alright, we're just getting into our part.
What does it say on the dial?
1722 BC.
So I've made a real horlicks of that.
I know.
Good. Send for Queen Vashti. Tell her I want to dress up in her bed.
Oh, dear. Sorry about that. Sorry.
Clear those thoughts from your mind, Smurl.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
All joking aside,
are all of my officers stupid?
Sorry, David, can we take it again from line 9? For some reason, it might tell a wee crack on. It might just even be a wee bit of wind off the script, believe it or not.
Wind off the script? That's a new one to me now. Wind off the script.
Script wind. Oh, yes, we've got a touch of script wind. We've got the old script wind. It's a constant perennial problem we have in commission, you know, script wind. We've got wind for this, wind for that, but script wind is the one you don't want to get. If you get script wind, it can spoil a whole evening's work. Seen it in the past, seen it in the future. Script wind, you don't want to be having script wind.
Thank you. Well, just for that.
You mean you weren't recording it?
My, that was pretty entertaining, wasn't it?
It was so funny. Brings back really good memories. Colm, look, that just shows how much fun that we all can have sometimes. And I noticed a distinguished former moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland messing about with the clip wind there.
Indeed. Yeah, well, for some of the people who are in quite high-powered jobs, they enjoy doing this. In the case of some, they've been doing this for a long, long time, and they enjoy it. I get the job of ringing them up and saying, can you be free in 4 weeks' time or something like this to do something? And I'm staggered time after time how much people are prepared to put themselves out.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? There's so many people who've been involved over the years. They've given time, talent. Commission's really been blessed many times over. If you think about it, writers, actors, technicians, presenters, engineers, producers, some have sadly passed away. Some have moved on to other things. Some have stepped back for various reasons. But you know, all three of you, we owe a lot of people a very great debt of thanks.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
One final thought. Commission operates with the prayers and funding of people who want it to continue. If you want to pray for Commission and support Commission financially, we'd love you to. We'll give details in a moment. But how important has that support been over the last 50 years, Colm?
I think without it, Commission wouldn't have continued to exist. Someone once said to me, what you're doing makes no sense. Now, that was a bank manager. Because we give the programmes away. We don't, and they just could think that you could possibly do this. I think one of the things about being in Commission, even if it is as long as I have, is that sense that God has said to us, do this. And we're just trying to follow what we believe he wants to do. And whether we get feedback or whether we don't, all of those things are all secondary to the fact that God has, as far as I'm concerned, 50 years going near enough, we must be doing something right in God's eyes, because he could have closed us down a long time ago and would have.
Hilary, what excites and continues to excite you about this ministry?
Just the possibilities that are there, the fact that it's like a ministry nearly with no walls. You know, we do here, we do drama, we do audiobooks, etc. And then it goes out. Where? That's the exciting thing. That could be in the UK, or it could be in Malawi or the Philippines. And if people are blessed, we'll never know this side of heaven who has been blessed. But there's always that excitement of thinking that and knowing that somebody somewhere will be.
For me, it's quite similar actually to what Hilary has said. It's that sense of maybe a youngster listening to Treasure Box or to one of the other stories in Islamabad or in Nairobi or in Eastern Europe or in Birmingham or
in Lisburn.
Lisburn. Yeah. And that might be their first introduction to the gospel that bears fruit. Or it might be an encouragement to someone who's just going through a difficult time and needs to be reminded the Lord's with you.
It's a privilege to do something like this, which I enjoy, and I hope others enjoy, and I think from the feedback we get from within the team, they do. And that is the core of Commission, whatever we happen to be doing, that we are doing it for God.
Thank you, all three of you, for coming to a place you love coming to anyway, and being a part of this episode of the Commission Files. We've put a few pictures of this episode on the places where you can find out about us if you want to pray for us, if you want to support us financially. Have a look at the Commission Broadcast Centre Facebook page, Commission Broadcast Centre. There's our Instagram page, @Commission Broadcast, @Commission Broadcast. There's our YouTube channel, @Commission Christian Radio NI. All the podcasts are on there.
Our website, commissionradio.org, has been updating recently, but it's there and it points you to us.
Don't forget to sign up to listen to all our episodes and listen back to any you've missed. The Commission Files is on just about all the podcast platforms. On many of them there's a text us option, another way to get in touch, as long as you're nice.
From all of us at Commission, thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.